Welcome to our trauma reporting panel presented by United Way of El Paso County's El Paso United Family Resiliency Center. I'm your moderator for this afternoon's event. I'm Bob Moore, President and CEO of El Paso Matters, and I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the United Way of El Paso County, a role I've been proud to fulfill for about 8 years now. I'm very pleased to be with all of you today and to have the opportunity to be in conversation with our expert panel. I'll introduce our panelists shortly, but first I wanted to take a moment to share a little more about the El Paso United Family Resiliency Center and its mission. For those of you who may not be familiar, in the wake of the August 3rd terrorist attack on El Paso, local, state, and community agencies identified the need to stand up a resiliency center for long-term community recovery. In collaboration with county and city governments and funding through the Office of the Governor, United Way of El Paso County was entrusted to be the backbone agency to host the center and lead those efforts here. The El Paso United Family Resiliency Center opened its doors on December 19th, offering a place of healing and support dedicated to serving those directly and indirectly impacted by the tragedy. The main focus of the FRC is to disseminate information and assist community members in navigating the variety of services available in response to the August 3rd tragedy. Now, as the one-year mark nears, the FRC, in partnership with the city, county, and other partners, have curated a series of events focused on healing and support, including today's panel. All these commemorative events and activities fall under the banner of Together We Remember, Together We Heal. To find out how you can take part in these activities past your role in the media, please visit the FRC website. Details about that can be found in the chat box. Our topic today is reporting on trauma. More than ever, journalists play a vital role in our community. And when tragedy hits, like it did last year, reporters are on the front lines working to provide communities with trustworthy and reliable information. Many journalists are filled with passion for their job, but sometimes the work can be overwhelming, especially when covering trauma. It's the reason we want to provide support and have a conversation about how to build resilience when reporting on a difficult story. With me today are 4 special guests who will share their expertise, experience, and wisdom with us all. First, after a successful career at some of the nation's leading newspapers, Zita Arocha became a national leader in the effort to diversify the country's newsrooms to make them better reflect the communities they serve. She recently retired as an associate professor of practice at the University of Texas at El Paso's Department of Communications, but she's still affiliated with UTEP. Zita, thank you for being here. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and any particular experiences with trauma during your career.
Yeah, so, you know, as a journalist, when I was in the newsroom and the Miami Herald, the Washington Post, I mean, and you're a general assignment reporter, you pretty much have to cover a little bit of everything. And in my time as a working journalist, for example, I interviewed rape victims. I interviewed actually a series of women who were all raped by the same man over different periods of time. I've talked to parents of students who've committed suicide. You know, the kinds of things that every journalist has to cover and be prepared for. Although I do have to say that I don't think you can ever be fully prepared for what it is you're going to find, and especially when there's a tragedy like the one that happened in El Paso. But I liked, when I was in the classroom, I liked to talk to my students about reporting on traumatic events and how do you do it. One of the things I did was after the August 3rd mass shooting here in El Paso, and it happened before classes began. But what I decided to do is, once classes did begin at the end of August, is to put the students through an exercise as though they were reporting on the shooting as a breaking news story, and basically go to all of the different news sites, use social media, and report the story as if they were actually there and it was happening. And again, it's so important for students to understand that once they make the commitment to become a journalist, they're going to be placed in those kinds of situations all the time, from a plane crash to a shooting, to a school shooting, to coronavirus. And now, of course, that's the big one for all of us. How do you cover that and stay sane? And you can't really discount the kind of trauma and the emotional impact that covering a trauma has on you as a reporter. And I'll give you just one final example that happened to me personally. I had been covering the courthouse in Dade County, Florida, where Miami is. And I was covering all of these horrific trials, from child molestation to a little girl who was 13 who was butchered in her bedroom by two carpet salesmen who were in the neighborhood. And of course, it was like reporting on trauma after trauma after trauma. And there came a point one day when I was in the courtroom covering a trial, and I started to cry, just out of the blue. And I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. 2 years is enough. I cannot interview another father of a dead child. And I went to my editors and asked for a change in assignment. So I think it's really important that the journalist be aware of what impact, whatever the story is that you're covering, is having on you, because it's going to have an impact. We're all human, so we're all emotional beings. And so it's important for journalists to know when it's time to say, hey, I need help. I can't cover that story for whatever reason. And it doesn't mean that you're less of a journalist, or that, you know, somehow you're going to lose your credentials as a journalist, but it is acknowledging that we're surrounded by trauma all the time. So I wanted to share that because it's close to my heart, and it's important, I think, for students to know that when they go into this profession. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Estela Casas, who recently concluded one of El Paso's most impactful and storied journalism careers. She now serves as executive director of the Foundations for University Medical Center and El Paso Children's Hospital. Estela, share a little bit more about your background, on the off chance that anyone here isn't familiar with you, especially events of trauma that you've covered.
Well, I just closed out my career as a broadcast journalist after 37 years in English and Spanish. I worked at KDVC, at KTSM, and 27 years at KVIA, and covered Challenger explosion, different earthquakes when all these people were killed in Mexico and Turkey, and 9/11, the August 3rd shooting, and now I did not cover the global pandemic, but gosh, when I was listening to Zita, you realize that how much trauma is around us, and it's around us every single day. And you don't realize how it weighs heavily on your heart and in your head until you kind of separate yourself a little bit. Although I've gone from reporting on trauma to many times learning about trauma at the hospitals with children, with women suffering from breast cancer, from men getting brain cancer or whatever. So I've gone from reporting trauma to listening to it and trying to help and help people through their journeys. So I haven't totally gotten away from that. I left TV news because I wanted to help other people get through their cancer journey, through their illnesses. And I guess I couldn't say that I had enough of reporting on all the bad things happening in our community. I didn't think of it that way. I just thought it was time to move in a different direction, to pivot, and to have more opportunities to make a difference in my community. But covering trauma is very hard. I remember, I have a horrible memory, and there is such thing as chemo brain, although I can't use that as an excuse every day now. But the thing that I can remember on the August 3rd shootings, after 9/11, of course, I was just such an impact on all our lives. But the August 3rd shooting, I was in the middle of nowhere at a cattle drive. I was on a horse and rounding and attempting to round up cattle, something that I had, never done. And, we were finishing up when my daughter called me and says, "Where are you, Mom?" She's living in Fort Worth. She says, "Where are you? Are you near the airport?" I said, "No, I'm in the middle of nowhere." And she says, "Mom, there's something going on. What do you know about it?" I said, "I don't know anything. I don't know anything." I was so far removed out by Bone Ranch. And I didn't know. And then all of a sudden I started getting videos and text messages, and I finally made it into the station. And it was just so surreal to be reporting on something like this. My coworkers and my co-anchors were talking about the facts. And so when I arrived on set, I felt like I brought something different because this is my community. And how do you report on something like that? Well, as a journalist, you have to present the facts, of course, not show any pictures, and never report on rumors. Now, I understand, I didn't watch any of the other stations, but I heard about it, and we can't sensationalize. And my role as a news anchor was to report the facts, but also transmit some sort of peace and safety, that we were all going to be okay and we were going to be resilient and come out of this together. So, when you get in front of a camera hour after hour after hour, you just have to really dig deep and say, I am representing the people who are watching. What would they do in my position? And you got to be real. And sometimes that realness brings out the rawness in us. And I broke down after all those hours, after seeing some of the video and seeing some of the people reporting, and some of the people who are out there in front of Walmart. And I broke down, but it was okay, because that's how everyone felt. And so I didn't see it as a job. I saw it as a duty and a responsibility to the audience to make them feel better at home, and to give them the facts, and to just be myself, how, like it or not.
Thank you, Estela. Our next panelist is Alfredo Corchado, the Dallas Morning News border correspondent who is based here in El Paso. Alfredo is the author of 2 critically acclaimed books, and recently was named Star Reporter of the Year by Texas Associated Press Managing Editors and the Headliners Foundation of Texas. Alfredo, share a little bit from your own experiences, which sadly are quite extensive in covering trauma of many different sorts.
First of all, thank you to United Way for the invitation, and thank you, Bob, for moderating. I've been covering, I guess, trauma all my 30 years as a journalist, starting with the El Paso Herald-Post, the Wall Street Journal. But I think the last 2 decades and a half have been pretty intense. Going back to 9/11 in DC, I was a correspondent there. And then coming back to the United States, to the US-Mexico border, covering the women of Juarez, and just following the investigation, I think, for almost 2 years. Obviously, the most recent history has been covering the drug violence in Mexico and the drug war, and investigating into who's behind so many murders in Mexico, where the disappear are, etc. I thought that I had gotten to a point where I could cover anything and get away with it by the slogan or the prevalent attitude that as journalists, we somehow find the sidelines. We can always stay on the sidelines and take whatever comes, and still be able to be the impassive, immune as a reporter. I think probably the closest thing I had ever gone to August 3rd was covering the massacre of teenagers in Ciudad Juarez. the Via Salvarcar. And I remember that day because I was there covering with other colleagues, Deli House from the Houston Chronicle, Angela Cocherga, at that point from AHBLO. And I remember looking around and thinking, we are so lucky that on this day, when there were something like 7, 8 hearses on the same street in Ciudad Juarez, on that day, it started raining. And so people couldn't really tell that a lot of the reporters were also crying. You know, we could just sort of pretend nothing's happening, but we looked around and we're all crying. August 3rd taught me that, you know, that volcano that we carry inside of us, August 3rd, it finally exploded. And we were here that morning in El Paso. It was my father's 83rd birthday. We're getting ready to celebrate, you know, happy birthday. My partner, Angela, and I were planning to travel that afternoon to California. So we thought we'd do the happy birthday in the morning and then leave. Obviously, the call came in and that changed everything. But I remember as we were headed for Walmart, we looked at each other. Angela had been covering, you know, AHBLO. At the time, she was covering the story for the Albuquerque Journal. And we looked at each other and we thought, you know, we never thought we were going to cover a massacre on this side. And on my father's birthday. And so it finally, I guess it finally caught up. And I you know, I try to keep it together. We try to kind of lean on each other, help each other, talk through it with each other. But I remember, I think it was like 3 days later, we were covering there was a rally when President Trump was coming in, and there were people at a baseball park. And at the last minute, I took my niece. I said, you may want to come with me. And it's because I felt like I was losing it. And I wanted to make sure she was there. And at one point, I just kind of stood there, you know, trying to interview people. But I felt like a robot at that moment, just, you know, taking quotes in, et cetera. And I kept telling Angela, you know, at some point we need to get away, maybe get some help. Because like 20 years of a career of covering Juarez, covering Mexico, covering Tamaulipas, it was finally there. That moment was there. Thanks to journalism and thanks to deadlines, a month later, I'm in Mexico City, and my editor calls and says, my book editor calls and says, we need you to write a piece about the August 3rd shooting to try to get it into an online magazine, LitHub, because your book is coming out in paperback. And I remember I'm sitting in La Condesa, Parque Mexico. The mariachis are coming, maybe because I was far away from El Paso. But for the next 24 hours, I just broke down. And I had to like write this, I think it was a 3,000-word essay. But that was the best therapy, because I could just, you know, let go. And to this day, I look at that and thought, okay, this is the beginning of therapy for myself. I call Angela. I think we were crying over the phone, talking about it. But then obviously COVID hits, and I think I'm like the rest of El Paso. I mean, the mourning process hasn't really started or stopped. I mean, I think we're still processing, and I say that because we're getting ready for the anniversary, and as I start reporting again, I feel the same emotions in me. That was probably too much to share, but it's a trauma panel, so thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alfredo. That was very, very moving, and I think something that all of us can relate to. The next panelist I want to introduce may be able to talk a little bit more about the points Alfredo's been touching on. Celeste Nevarez is Chief of Clinical Services at Emergence Health Network, El Paso County's largest mental health provider. Celeste has a BA in psychology and a minor in sociology, and earned an MA in counseling psychology in 2010 from Arizona State University. Celeste, obviously the emotions that you're hearing from Alfredo and Estela and Zita are also emotions that are shared by people throughout El Paso. And as Alfredo said, we're still in the grieving process a year later. So take it from there. What are you hearing from the community that journalists in particular should know about?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was excited to be a part of this panel for a number of reasons, but one of the main ones being, as a clinician, I've been a therapist coming up on 10 years now, and this population of journalists and just the topic of journalism is incredibly traumatic. And I exist in a world in therapy, in clinical sense, that we talk about trauma, we know what it is, we name it, we talk about it, we understand that it's ongoing, and we have to continue to research it and learn how to serve, as trauma is complex and ever-changing and very personal to each individual. And so to be marrying the two, groups of people, to me is just a breath of fresh air, because I've seen this both as a clinician that's worked with journalists, but also having been interviewed time and time again on different topics, August 3rd being one of them, where at the end of the interview, folks would want to, hey, so how do I get in contact with somebody, or how do I talk to somebody? And I was thankful that they would reach out, but I also was like, oh, we should be talking about this on the air as well. That I know that you all report facts and data, but as you all mentioned and shared so eloquently, you're human first, and you don't just erase that emotional part of your brain or your emotional processing because you're working or reporting. So I'm so thankful that these two worlds are coexisting in this space here and now, and that we're talking about things more and more about vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. And that's a topic of mine that's near and dear to my heart, and working with different populations. But you don't have to have been in that Walmart on that day to be affected and to be impacted. Trauma is so much more complex than that. And you all here have some sort of story that you're holding in your heart or in your mind, or you're replaying that even as this anniversary is coming up. And that secondary trauma from hearing those stories that you all shared earlier, that doesn't go away. And you don't just start typing or reporting as if you don't have an emotional response to that information. Although you weren't there, the empath of you, within you, connects to that story, connects to that data and that information, and still needs to be processed, even though you weren't there experiencing it necessarily firsthand. So I'm so glad I'm muted, because I'm mm-hmming and nodding a lot on the side, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity to be in y'all's space as a guest and just talk about these things, because it's so important. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Celeste. You bring some very unique insights into this panel that I think will help really round out the conversation we're going to have. I'm going to start by asking a few questions. I would invite the audience to feel free to submit questions in the chat box. We'll try to save some time at the end to get to your questions. And I've asked the panelists to try to monitor the chat, so if there's any kind of immediate thing that they can respond to, they'll try to jump on that. So I want to start with a conversation about the role of media in reporting mass shootings and other forms of trauma. Obviously, we have the anniversary coming up of August 3rd, which is going to bring a whole new set of trauma to people. And that should cause us as journalists to raise some questions about how we approach what we're going to do And I want to tap the expertise of this group here. The first question is, what responsibility does the media have to the community with our reporting? Estela, I'd like you to start with that one.
In listening to everyone, I have gone from trauma to trauma to trauma. And let me go back to when I was diagnosed with bilateral breast cancer in 2017. And that was, I reported on my trauma, you know, and it's like, you know, people ask me, well, why did you do that? For ratings? It's like, no, it wasn't for ratings. I felt it was my responsibility as a journalist who had the platform to be able to share the journey that I thought I had reported on for so many years. You know, so many years reporting on women with breast cancer and health issues and all that stuff. And I thought I knew. And little did I realize how hard it was until I had to go through it. And everybody followed along, whoever wanted to, through my trauma and my journey through with bilateral breast cancer. And, you know, as you know, I did a lot of different stories on you know, what it was like. Came on with a wig, took off my wig, reported about getting the breast implants. And so, you know, so I went from that trauma to the August 3rd. And so I guess I haven't had a chance to really heal. But as journalists, you know, when we have that platform, we have to use it for the greater good. And opening up about all these things was traumatic, but it was also healing for me, because it's so important for people who see us on TV, who think, you know, we just walk in and everybody does our makeup and they, you know, pick up out our dresses and that we don't feel and that we're not allowed to feel. But it was important for me to talk about all that trauma and show up and show some resiliency every day with my wig or my fake eyelashes or my penciled in eyebrows, but to show people that you can get through this. And I guess that experience, a very public journey, helped me to report on the August 3rd shooting. I remember that afternoon when I finally made it into the station. That evening, my friend Brenda Anchondo called me, and she said, "Estela, I can't find my son. I can't find my son. They don't know where my son is. They don't know where my daughter-in-law is. They don't know where the baby is. What do I do?" And I didn't have any answers. And that moment when she found out that it was her son, Andre Pablo, and her daughter-in-law, it was just so devastating, because it came home. It was so close to home that it hits you. And you know how somebody came into our community, our loving, caring community, and did this to us was heartbreaking. And so, you know, in reporting on this, you had to be it's our responsibility to be real and truthful, and not your opinion. You can't, you know, we are talking about opinions, about journalists sharing their opinions, but we have to share that shared feeling that everybody is in mourning and everybody is hurting. So I felt that it was always my responsibility to use the platform as a news anchor to report the truth, and to report my truth, and report other people's trauma. So it is a big responsibility, and you have to use it properly, and you have to use it with that being very conscious of your words and of your efforts, and of the things you talk about. So it is a big responsibility, and everybody can take it to different levels. And that's a level that I chose to take, because all these women who go through these traumas and through this stuff, they need to be recognized, and people need to know that we all have stories to tell.
I was just thinking something that Estela said really resonated with me, and that is when you said that you felt an obligation as you were reporting the facts, to calm the community, let them know that we're going to be okay, you know, and we don't think of our role that way, but when a tragedy like this happens, it really is a community tragedy. And so I think that you did it absolutely the right way. And you did something that I think many journalists who are with the cable networks or whatever kind of lose sight of the fact that the community also needs help in getting over a tragedy like this. The other thing that resonated with me, Estela, is that, you know, like you were saying, you spoke about and you shared your tragedy, your trauma with your viewers, with the community, which I would think was an incredible gift to them, because as we know, so many other women are going through or have gone through something exactly like what you did. And as journalists, this is something too about myself. I always thought that being a journalist was a way of kind of putting on a facade, so to speak, or a mask, you know, so that I could be objective and I could just, you know, not get involved emotionally in what was going on. And then, you know, the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that our own trauma, because all of us have had traumas in our own life, be it the death of a relative, be it an illness, whatever it is, that we bring our own traumas into our reporting, and how we've dealt with our own trauma, I think, can help us in helping people who have been going through a similar kind of trauma. You know, trauma is universal, right? And there are degrees, obviously, but it's very real. And I think acknowledging that and moving on, it's just like when I burst into tears in that courthouse, you know, I just couldn't take it anymore. It was too real. It was too raw. And so, so I think that going back, you performed an incredible community service by doing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll definitely second that. Alfredo, I want to start with you with this next question, and then kind of put Celeste on notice that I'm interested in your viewpoint after Alfredo has a chance to talk. But when it comes to engaging with victims and families of trauma, how do you exercise the principle of doing no further harm as you approach people who are suffering?
I'm not an expert, but I think I've covered this long enough to know that you don't really push people, you just listen. And I think that's something that many of us maybe at times don't do well enough, but just really listen to them. And I think, you know, sometimes they're in shock. I remember the August 3rd, you know, people were just shocked, and you may want to start with a simple question, you know, talk to me about so-and-so. And then all of a sudden, they're engaged, you're engaged, and it takes you into all kinds of directions. But I want to pick up on something Estela said, because it's, as a journalist, it's responsibility. And I think, you know, she said that word. And I'm right. I think for the longest time, I think Zita mentioned the facade. You know, you carry a facade with you. You're a reporter. You're immune. And I remember my first editor who hired me many years ago from El Paso, and he said, you have to be truthful with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself. I didn't go out and hire you because I wanted someone to be a Harvard person or a Yale person or a Columbia. I hire you because you're from El Paso and you bring these two worlds with you. So it's a privilege, but I think also you always want to kind of prove the reader that you may not be objective, because obviously you carry your world with you. I mean, I'm an immigrant, I'm Mexican. I mean, when I interview people, they can see that. I can't hide that. But I'm going to be balanced. I'm going to tell both sides of the story, and I'm going to stick to the facts. I think why El Paso was such a perfect storm is that it challenged me as a human being and as a reporter on everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in. I mean, you know, this was a white gunman from North Texas who came to El Paso to try to erase our history, and basically challenge people like my parents who love this country, who feel very American, and who sacrificed everything they knew to come here to give us an opportunity. And he wanted to kill as many Mexicans as possible. So I think that was the part of me that had to, you know, sort of come to Jesus moment, that go back to Frank Allen, my editor, and wanted, you know, and actually I did call him later. I said, it took me maybe 3 decades, but I now see what you meant by that. You know, you have to be truth with yourself. And I think when you do that, you actually become a better journalist. I mean, I sat around every afternoon, every evening, watching Estela Casas because she brought a sense of calm and a sense of reassurance. And I feel like whatever morning I was doing it, you know, with someone I knew and someone who kind of felt my pain. And I think that's what you do when you're interviewing people. You want to empathize, you know, and it's not like you're pretending, because that comes naturally, but you empathize, you listen to them, you talk to them. It's a human to human exchange.
Thank you, Alfredo. Celeste, the issue of re-traumatization is something that all journalists have to keep at top of mind when they're reporting on trauma, including on the anniversaries of trauma. And I think Alfredo had some great suggestions there for how to approach people to try to at least protect from making the situation worse. I'm just curious, from a clinical perspective, what advice would you give journalists on how to cover trauma in a way that doesn't make the situation worse?
I think much like an interview in therapy, our clients or our consumers, whoever you're interviewing, will share as much as they feel they can. And so when you create a safe space to hold that difficult conversation, people connect with that, going back to what you all were saying, like connecting to that empathy, feeling connected, feeling like you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable. As a therapist, as a journalist, then I will allow myself to feel like I can be vulnerable. When we create safe spaces for people to be able to share their story, they can do so. And acknowledging that when that safe place is not established, people become frustrated, they become agitated, they become re-traumatized, all of that. I'm looking at the chat box, there's a question about that, like pressuring somebody to speak, right? And in no way are we going to get an accurate, vulnerable, honest conversation if somebody doesn't feel safe in that space. So I think in both of our careers, it's our responsibility to create a safe space to have those difficult conversations.
I can share.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Zita.
I can share an incident where I, in retrospect, really did the right thing. It goes to exactly what you're speaking. So I was covering the funeral of a 15-year-old boy in a suburban wealthy neighborhood in Washington, D.C. He had gone home one day after school, went up to his bedroom and shot himself in the head, and his brother found him. And so, of course, everyone at the school knew him, so I attended the funeral. And I made a decision at the funeral that I would not approach the parents, because I put myself in their shoes. And I thought, you know, if that were my child, there's no way in hell I'd want to speak to a journalist at this moment in time. So I spoke to other people. I spoke to other students, to teachers, et cetera, and I waited. And I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I decided to call the house. And the mom answered the phone, and I introduced myself, and she said, you know, she said, I saw you at the funeral. I so appreciated the fact that you did not approached me at that moment. And she said, but I want you to come over now because I want to tell you about my son. And so they invited me into their living room. I sat there, had tea with them, and they told me everything that was going on. And they did it because they were terrified that other young people would follow their son's decision. And so that, I think, in those situations, exactly like Celeste said, you have to know when to hold back. You have to know when this is not a good moment to talk to that traumatized person.
Estela, another question I'd like to start with you on. Yeah, obviously, people on this conversation are preparing or maybe already are working on sort of anniversary stories about August 3rd. What are the top considerations that you would say that they should look at as they, and this is for both reporters and photographers and video journalists too, because I think there's probably different considerations for different professions here. But what should be top of mind for them as they start planning how they want to cover this anniversary?
I think there's a saying in Spanish, si quieres saber a dónde vas, voltea para atrás. If you want to know where you're going, you got to look back. But you can't dwell in the past. I would imagine what I would like to see on TV is how people have come out of this. What have they learned? How resilient have they been? And what they have done to move forward. For example, the Anchondo family. You know, perfect example. A little boy, he just celebrated his first birthday. I participated in the little parade that they had for him. How have they moved forward without forgetting, obviously, their son and their daughter-in-law? And of course, you know, you got to cover, I mean, the normal stuff, what's happened with Crucius and all the legal stuff. But as somebody who's no longer on TV and would want to watch an update on it, I want to know what people have done to move forward and to show their strength, to show their courage, and how they got through it, and how we as a community, as individuals, have to push through and get through all the trauma and come out better in the end. I have no clue what they can even to imagine how they even feel about losing a son and their daughter-in-law, and then having to take care of that little boy, Paul Gilbert. But you got to look forward. Life goes on, and I would just like to see in the updates on the different families and how they've moved forward and what they've learned from this. That's what I would like to see.
Alfredo, what are your thoughts if I were to ask you, hey, what's the couple bits of advice you would give to people who are planning anniversary coverage about the massacre?
I think for a lot of reporters, you know, it's an anniversary. There's going to be a lot of interest, but I think we also have to be mindful, respectful, that for these people, it's bringing up a lot of memories, a lot of bad memories, and we have to know when not to push for an interview. At the same time, I think El Paso is an example of not just resilience, but I mean, I remember one interview I did with the mother of one of the victims. And I said, I'm headed to Dallas. I'm gonna go to North Texas. I'm gonna try to find the Crucius family. If I do find them, do you have a message for them? And the message really stunned me. And the message was, we don't blame you. We send nothing but love. And I said, why? I said, I'm curious, why would you do that? And she said, because I don't want to live with the kind of hatred that this person had in his heart to drive 650 something miles and to kill so many people. I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. And I think there's a powerful story to do about the city of El Paso. It's a city of mostly immigrants and people who ask themselves the question that a lot of immigrants ask: how do we fit in? And I think it's a story that in a country that's dealing with race issues, race questions, it's a city that other cities can look to and say, look how El Paso's doing this.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to go to questions from the audience, and we already have some, so I'd encourage people to put them in chat. Celeste, I want to direct this to you. You've seen some very raw emotions from journalists today, and I think everybody in the audience can relate to it and has experienced themselves. So what should journalists be looking toward for self-care as we approach the anniversary of probably the most traumatic event any of us have experienced?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a wonderful question. I smirk because I think self-care is so important, and I think it's kind of a buzzword right now, so I get nervous about it because people are like, self-care, got to go to the spa or massage and that's self-care, and it's so much more than that, and it's so individualistic. Like what I do for my self-care is going to maybe not work at all for anybody here, or it totally would help. But so recognizing that we all have emotions, and it's our responsibility to, one, recognize them first and foremost, and then secondly, to work towards regulating them. And what I mean by that is, if you're at a 10 out of anxiety, 10 out of 10 for anxiety, not the day to try to tackle a 30-page long to-do list, recognizing what you need in order to bring that emotion down from a 10 to a 2. So recognizing that even though here and now there might not be any emotion, right now you might be sitting here going, oh, I'm fine, August 3rd, I got it. That might change that day, that might change throughout the day, and that might even change after, and that's okay. So recognizing what you need for yourself to be well. And if that means decompressing, getting away from the screen for a little while, if that means going for a walk, if that means calling a loved one, if that means, playing tennis, I don't know, whatever it is that you enjoy that refills or recharges you. Because what you all do does demand a lot of, yes, physical and intellectual strength, but it also requires you to be emotionally well and to be emotionally stable and regulated. Otherwise, you come in, and that's not to ignore your previous trauma or whatever's going on in your personal life, but what I mean by that is the story will shift and it'll then become about you, right? Or whatever it is that you're bringing into this conversation. And so by being well, by taking care of yourself on a regular basis and knowing when things like anniversaries, August 3rd, or an anniversary of a story you covered that impacted you, recognizing those dates and times, and that anything surrounding that time period needs to require a little extra love and a little extra TLC by doing the things that make you feel the best version of yourself, then do that. And I invite you to do that, because otherwise your work reflects it, you're disappointed later, frustration comes through later on in the quality of the work. And so this is more preventative. So self-care is preventative work, and nobody is above or immune to preventative work. It helps everybody. So I invite you all to recognize some upcoming dates and things going on, and the fact that you're covering a lot already here and now. It's not like the world is totally calm and peaceful in this moment. And so taking time here and now for yourself in preparation for everything that's coming up.
I think as reporters, we all have to, at some point, talk to Celeste for our next story.
I think, so something that I'd like to say is that I think you do have to find a place to channel that energy and find the best version of yourself. My daughter tells me, oh, you got to do self-care. It's like, how do I do self-care? We didn't grow up doing self-care and taking care of ourselves. So that's hard to comprehend too, as journalists. It's hard. And in the role that I play now too, it's just hard because it's part of our makeup. It's part of who we are and how we channel those things. And it's hard on everyone. Sorry about that. I just got a call. And so some good advice, some self-care. So I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out.
But I want to add to that. You said, I'm sorry about that. And I was like, no. So the other that I talk about in therapy a lot is unapologetic self-care. right? So if I have to cancel a meeting because I already set up my exercise workout for today that I am not skipping today, then, and my friend calls and is like, hey, do you want to watch, whatever? And I'm like, no, I have to, this is something that I need to do for me to be well. Otherwise, I'll go with you and I'm going to be a grouchy, complaining, terrible human and you're going to regret hanging out with me. It's truth. But so I get it. And I know that that's a huge shift, right? Like I'm telling traditionally Mexican women that you need to carve out time for yourself. And I might as well say like Santa's coming to your house tomorrow morning by asking them to do that. I know that, I recognize what I am asking of you and the weight of it, totally. But you'll be a better mother, lover, brother, sister, friend, all of those things when you do that for yourself. So talk to me later, Estela. We'll figure out a self-care plan for you.
It is a generational thing, and we just have to work through it. But yes.
So one follow-up with that, because this seems to be putting the onus on the individual to own their own self-care, and I think that lets newsroom management off the hook too easily. So I'm curious, and Zita, I'd like to start with you. What obligations do newsroom managers have to support their journalists in these kinds of times, both while they're reporting and then after they filed the story?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. I'm not speaking for all of them, but many editors are not very sensitive when it comes to the mental health of their reporters. I know you're different, and there are some who understand. But just this morning, I was listening to a talk by some folks at Reuters, and they were talking about, and I think it's happened because of the coronavirus, where they have established all of kinds of internal protocols to monitor how well people are doing, how well their journalists are doing, and the kind of support that they're getting when they need it. And the thing that also really encouraged me is they said, well, we're making this available to our freelancers as well. And so I think that they've really stepped up to do this. Of course, they're an international entity, news entity, but I think that it is the responsibility of editors to touch base with their reporters and find out, how are you? How's it going? Are you being affected by this? The same kinds of questions I think that we journalists would be asking victims of trauma. It's essential that, and that there be some kind of a fallback to help a journalist when they really are having a hard time, be it take the weekend off, and go to the beach, or, how about if you do a couple of feature stories, next couple of weeks, rather than going back in and covering that very difficult story. So really it takes sensitivity, and I think that the editors need, in a way, as much training as the journalists do about how to take care of themselves.
I would just say that I think my editors personally have been very supportive. I think the responsibility lies on me, is that I have not wanted to take time off. I mean, and that's very unhealthy. I'm first to say it's very unhealthy, but I've been so obsessed with the story since it happened that I confess I didn't take any vacation time last year. And I kept thinking, 2020 will come along. There'll be plenty of vacation. Obviously, COVID.
I want to get to a couple questions from the folks who've joined us today, starting with one from Renee Klajic. And this builds off of something that Zita talked a little bit about too, but Renee asks, can the panelists discuss the ethical dilemma of pushing people who have recently experienced trauma to speak publicly about it? Like, what are the circumstances under which you will not ask someone or push someone to speak to the press? Alfredo, you want to start with that?
I mean, like I was saying, I mean, I'm very conscious about, I guess, having covered so much in Mexico, not just the trauma part of it, but also the dangerous part of it. So I think I've I go overboard in making sure that I'm protecting, first of all, the source, that I do everything possible to protect that source. Not just for trauma reasons, but also not to put that person in a situation where it may be dangerous for the safety.
Zita, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I was just reading this morning, the DART Center. By the way, I have a handout for all of the folks that participated today with some links to some training on trauma for journalists. But they were saying that, you know, ordinary people do not understand how the media works, how the press works. And I think that part of our responsibility, more so in a situation of trauma, when you're actually speaking to a victim of trauma or a family member of trauma, that you explain to them what the process is. And you explain to them, you know, what you're going to do with their photograph, with their picture. You can't always control it, but you can always let them know how it works. And, you know, and so I would start off there very, very basically. You know, I'm writing a story. This is for the 6 o'clock news, or this is going to go, you know, online on this website. I am writing the story for this reason, and make them comfortable with the process that you're following as a news reporter. That's not always possible, of course. I mean, this is like in an ideal world, because in a trauma, and if it's a happening breaking news story, there may not be that much time. Your editor's, you know, breathing down your neck to get the story, you're on deadline and whatnot. But to the extent that you're able to do that and calm them about the process you're following to collect information for your story, I think that goes a long way.
And also, I think the importance of making sure they understand the dynamics, the importance of social media, and you know, that's a whole different layer. And to stress to them that whatever, in our case, whatever appears in the Dallas Morning News will also appear in Spanish. And you know, that's part of the process of letting them know what's going to happen with the information they give you.
I'm going to have to pull away from all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me and to letting me share and remember, you know, what it was like that terrible, terrible day. And thank you for allowing me to share today. I'm going into another meeting, but I appreciate all of you, and you all stay well.
Thank you, Estela.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll have one last question before we wrap up, because I think it's a really good question from Andrew Polk. So we've been talking about how we interview people involved in traumatic situations, but Andrew's question gets to what happens after we've done the interviews and how we present the information. And he says, how do we take care in presenting in our final products to keep from re-traumatizing the community? In particular, I've heard feedback that some of the documentaries that have come out or are coming out that involve August 3rd seem exploitive or are using shocking imagery just for the sake of shock value. I think, you know, I was part of a PBS Frontline documentary on called Targeting El Paso that kind of knocked me for a loop when I watched it, because it immediately starts with these images from the parking lot at Walmart that I found really horrifying and unnecessary. But Alfredo, as you kind of put your whole package together for this anniversary, how do you approach that to kind of keep from re-traumatizing people, including with images?
I've been very careful from day one, from the moment I interview victims, that I would always call them and stay with them during the process. So my plan has always been to call them or make an effort, even during COVID, to try to, you know, 6 feet from each other, but tell them exactly what I'm saying, exactly what their quotes were, to make sure we're on the same page. That word exploitative is such a dangerous word and such a powerful word, and I'm always leery of that I don't want people to feel that we're exploiting their pain and what happened on that dreadful day. I mean, I guess the positive side is that my medium is online. It's print, so I don't have to worry about the video part. But it's something that we talked to photographers about, to even show the victims the pictures that we plan to run, to make sure that they're comfortable with that.
Zita, any final thoughts on that? Oh, you're unmuted, Zita.
Yeah, I just posted something on the chat. Yeah, a basic tenet of what we do as journalists when we go about reporting a story: do no harm. And sometimes, and myself included, in my younger and less experienced days, I may have unintentionally harmed a source or, someone that I put in a story, but not intentionally. And I think that's something we really all need to keep in mind as we do our jobs.
Thank you, Zita. So we're over our time. I really want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I particularly want to thank our panelists for sharing not only their thoughts, but their emotions. I think a lot of times as journalists, we try to hide from our emotions, and that's not healthy, nor is it realistic. So I know this was painful at times, but I salute you for opening yourselves up that way. Be sure to continue following El Paso United for updates regarding the commemorative events taking place in the next few weeks. You can find more information at elpasounited.org/love for El Paso. I think that's my favorite website of all time now. Thank you all very much again, and please stay safe.